Okay, probably it's hard to believe, but what communists believed and made as policy for Roma and politics is still valid today, and actually didn't disappear, are transformed. We have the same subjects, same policy, same goals, same measures, a different language. You'll hear more about this in my lecture. I am Ciprian Necula, and this is my lecture on Romanian Roma history and politics related to Roma history in Romania. Hello everybody. Today we are going to discuss about Roma history in the Romanian space from a political perspective. My name is Ciprian Necula. I'm chairperson of Roma Education Fund, and also I'm holding a Ph.D. in sociology, and I have a BA in political science. My Ph.D. subject was related to the communist agenda and politics related to Roma identity and economy. And therefore, I think I could bring a new way to understand the Roma current situation. It's very important to acknowledge the fact that all over the history, we had a perspective from the power towards Roma. And that's the subject today. What was the Romanian principalities, Wallachia and Moldova, perspective on Roma slaves? And what was the solution to deal with this? Who managed to bring that, and what was the result? Then we should discuss about the current that cover all the Europe, eugenic policies and Holocaust. What was the Roma position in relation to that? What was the government believing, and how this reflected in our life? Later on, communism that took over Romania was also an interesting period from this point of view. The main policy had a name, and it was assimilation. What was the manifestation of this? What it meant for the communist, the assimilation of Roma, and what meant for Roma? What was the reaction and the tension, and how actually end up? Later on, when Romania, in the post-communist era, well, here too we had something quite interesting. We want to integrate Roma. But on what? And not only that, how? And with what resources? And what integration means. And what is the result of that, I hope also will clear today. Now, in the new democracy, new form of democracy, the young democracy of Romania, while it's in the EU already, we talk about inclusion of Roma. And I think same question are valid. What inclusion means? And what is the effect of policies of inclusion towards our people? So, that's the challenge today, to analyze in a historical scale, from a political perspective, what was the policies and politics of the state towards Roma, and what happened with those policies. I'm looking forward. The first big period that I would like to discuss with you and to introduce you in this new perspective, or not necessarily new, but a new approach towards it, is the Roma slavery. As you may already know, Roma in Romania were slaves for 500 years nearly. When I say Romania, I do refer to the Romanian principalities that were two of them holding slaves, which is Moldova and Wallachia. In Transylvania, we had a different situation and is not part of this discussion. So, in Moldova and Wallachia, Roma were slaves. And we know that since 14th century, when they first arrived and there were first documents of donations and exchanges and trading slaves. There is a debate now in the Romanian society. We call this statute of Roma not slaves, sclavi, but robi, which is actually, a synonym from Slavic origin of the same thing. And in terms of practices, were a lot of similar things with what you know already from United States. Roma were inferior by being born as Roma, and they were belonging to somebody. They could be sold. They could be used to any kind of work. They were subject of sexual abuses and other abuses, and even killed. However, the owners, they didn't have this right to kill somebody because of the religion, but there were tactics to kill them. For instance, we have a proverb in Romanian language: don't drown yourself as a Tsigan, as a gypsy, meaning that don't fail at the end of a process. How this came into Romanian language was through a practice that Roma were kept in the river and not let to get out of on the shore. They were pulled back with strings or pushed back, meaning that they will die to some point, but they were not killed. They were just simply drawn. This is shocking. And Romanians are using that, not knowing, of course, the origin of this proverb, as many others. So, getting back to this history, Roma were split in three kinds of slaves, belonging to the landlords, boyars, others belonging to the ruler, to the king of the principality, and other category to the Romanian Orthodox Church, to the monasteries. Each one of them were in different conditions in relation to the owners. Probably a different degree of freedom had the Roma belonging to the ruler, while the ones belonging to the landlords and the monasteries were kept and used differently with, again, different degrees. The worst conditions, as historians say, were in the monasteries. The most abuses and the biggest violence, maybe. But I'm not going to tell you what historian will tell you about this period of time. There are a lot of drama, a lot of abuses. And it was perpetuated in 500 years as one of the longest slavery period in the world with a group of people. For me, what was interesting was the abolition of slavery. How this happened. Why Romania decided to abolish the slavery. And again, when I say Romania, I refer to these two principalities. Well, one of the reasons is that Romania couldn't be a modern state with slaves. We had a lot of young people, sons related to mostly men, of course, to boyards, to landlords. They were studying abroad in France, in Germany, in Switzerland, and they come back with Illuminist ideas and a new dimension of humanity, learning about it in Western countries, and bringing that back. Want to construct a new Romania, to give up on feudalism and to build something new. And to do that, they analyzed the Romanian society, and slavery was one of the biggest issues. You can't have a modern Romania, a modern state, with slaves. While in Europe that time, only Russians and Romanians had slaves. That's the story from 19th century already. So we started from the 14th century. It was a long history of slavery with a lot of trades and a lot of abuses, and an existence for such a long period in this status. And then suddenly this current show up in Romania. And when you had the 48 revolution, that was one of the main topic to abolish slavery. By the way, I have to stop here to explain you also something important. Țigan, the term that it's intensively used in Romania when Roma are identified, actually in the official documents from that period of time, from all these 500 years, was associated with slaves. When you say Țigan, it was a synonym for rob or for slave. Because even in documents, sometimes they were used only the Țigan. You know, I'm selling a family of Țigan. They never mention slaves or rob. That's Țigan, which was a specific status of inferior people. So that's also a clarification of the origins or how this word Țigan was internalized in the Romanian space and what it meant and why now it's so important for Roma to fight against being called Țigan. Getting back to our subject, the Illuminists that were here, they're also Francmasons, and they organize in their specific way in Romania. And liberty and slavery was also a main subject. You cannot be a real person being enslaved and not being free. And a discussion quite ideologically started in Romania about what liberty means. What is freedom? Can you be a free person, by holding slaves? Are you really free? It was not about slaves. It was about slave owner. Are you a free person? Can you be called even, a human that contributes to society while you still hold slaves? This discussion was reflected not only in political debates and discussions. Some of them kept, some other did not. but also in the literature. There are poems, there are novels about this. Obviously, as you all know, the revolution didn't succeed in Romania. It succeeded for a short period of time till Ottoman Empire reinstated the order. Therefore, it was a failure, but the idea remained. There are some exchanges on that also Roma slaves wrote a letter to Faud Pasha saying that if you come and re-establish the slavery, we are going to burn down Bucharest. That's in a letter of Emilia Rakoviță, a member of Boyard landlord's class, to another lady. Didn't happen. We don't have other proofs for that, but I think it's an important moment when slaves reacted, ex-slaves, or in between, let's say, the status, seeing the liberty, the freedom, they reacted and say, if you send us back to slavery, we are going to react violently. Didn't happen. Again, it is a letter only that talks about this, but I think it's an interesting approach because slaves all this period were seen as a mass of people that they had no reaction, they had no consciousness, they didn't know what's with them. So they were treated like, animals. Okay, being Christian, that's another paradox of Romanian slavery. All the Roma slaves were also Orthodox Christian, and they were enslaved to the same church. That's something interesting, huh? Besides that, all these ideas that came into Romania put in danger the old order, the feudalism. And in the 19th century, mid-19th century, it happened the last act of abolition. Not only literature and politics contributed to that, but also some personal decisions. There were some landlords that decided to abolish their slaves, to free the slaves, before the principalities did. So it was a movement in the real sense. People that were trying to transform Romania, some of them truly believe that this is not the way how Romania should be. And some of them already did steps. One of them is Ion Câmpineanu, but there are others, landlords and intellectuals that did that in 19th century. Mid-19th century, 1856, abolition was complete. The Romanian principalities, both of them, find a way to stop this, and the way was to pay the landlords to release their slaves. It happened that, and Roma were free. Landlords were happy because they received some money. Monasteries protested a bit because they didn't receive that much money as they wish, and it stopped. Roma now were emancipated. Well, all this has a name. They call it Emancipation of Roma. And there is an important letter, actually speech, of Mihail Cogălnicianu in 91 in the Romanian Academy. Excellent, describing this momentum. He talks about emancipation of Roma, of Țigan. They were emancipated. And this is a complete already action, he said. Roma now, I'm saying Roma by today standards, but they will use Țigan. They are part of industry, they are in economics, they are workers, they are even speakers in the parliament. It's not mentioning who's that person or who are these guys. But obviously, he said that Roma evolved already in 35, 40 years. Well, emancipation for the two principalities that also within this period of time united and created Romania was actually for the state. State got rid of the problem of slavery and could be considered a modern state, while Roma remain in the same socio-economic and dependencies conditions. If landlords were paid to release their slaves, for slaves were no measures. Zero measures. So far, what is new with this period of Roma history, and from the perspective of analyzing it, it's of course the reason why emancipation happened. Why it was called emancipation? Because slaves has to be emancipated from their own owners, and in the same time, owners had to be emancipated themselves. As Paulo Freire will say, it is not enough that only one side of the oppressed and oppressed will develop. No, it cannot be. Both of them has to go through a process of reconciling and then emancipating both. What happened? We call that officially emancipation of Roma. We paid the owners to release their slaves, and then Roma were led to find their way. Of course, after 500 years of slavery, it is quite complicated to see your way. Many got back to their owners, many didn't know what to do with their freedom, and got stuck somehow for a long period of time. While emancipation meant, again, only paying the owners. No policies for Roma at all. If emancipation of Roma started with abolition of slavery, which was a legal act only, it is great, but never finalized, because nothing else was attached to it. And moreover, the emancipation of Roma meant a decision from top. Leaders were deciding that, slavery should stop. No more slavery in the modern Romania. Fine. But Roma contribution to that, Roma engagement to that, analyzing and interpreting what we could do actually to counterbalance the long history of slavery, didn't happen. It was, again, led by themselves. And some of them, of course, find their path, and some of them become even business people or people that were in parliament, or people that were in factories workers, and so on. But that's not a politics of a state. It was an individual development that they could take on board. What became Roma once they were emancipated? Surprise. Taxpayers. They become citizens and they had to pay taxes. And that's actually the emancipation of Roma from the 19th century. Indeed, they were not slaves officially, but they had to act as they used previously because of not knowing other path and not having the support of the states to do differently. If emancipation was the first policy on Roma in the Romanian principalities, without any other measures attached to it, what happened is that individuals developed themselves as they knew the best. And in 50 years already, a Roma movement flourished. Roma were building organizations, associations, political parties, even newspapers. They were engaged in business, in politics, they were teachers, they were part of the Romanian society. But this is not enough, because the second main policy on Roma came in, which was based on eugenic studies, influenced, of course, by trends coming from Nazism. And Roma were subject of that. Even some Roma politicians were helping Nazis to measure Roma and to see what kind of race are they. Of course, it showed up that Roma might be inferior. And that was the discourse at that epoch in Romania. Politicians took on board what scientists concluded. So they were wondering now what we should do with these people. And there were various solutions. Killing them was one of them. Deporting them was another one. Sterilizing them was another one. So the second main policy on Roma of the Romanian state was extermination of the Roma. Let's get rid of them. How this happened? Again, on an international context. If emancipation was influenced by the trends of Illuminism, the extermination was influenced by what happened in Europe with rising of populism, fascism, and Nazism. Roma politicians were confused, if not something else. They were promoting anti-Semitism in their newspapers, some of them. They even associate with Nazi party, saying that, well, they were the only ones open a door for us. So it's fine to be associated with Nazis. This is what happened. It was a young movement. Politicians were not experienced at all. They were confused and naive. What happened is that, of course, that you already know from the historians, what happened in the Second World War with Roma. Many of them were deported in Transnistria from the Romanian space. The official reasoning was not that Roma are ethnically inferior. No, they couldn't use that. Because even Nazi scientists could not prove with their fake and false and quasi-science anything about that. So what they did is they appealed to social order. They say that some Roma, especially nomads, are parasites and they commit crimes. And based on that, they allow local authorities to indicate who's that group of people that should be deported. Besides that, to know and to have a knowledge, they did a census on Roma. A special census was released for Roma to see where they are, how many they are, what kind of Roma are, separated in two main categories. First one was sedentary, and second one was nomads. The target was the first one, a list in the public documents. So, any mayor that considered that Roma are disturbing the social order, they put them on a list of people to be deported, and it happened that many of them, 25,000 roughly, were deported in Transnistria. And luckily, this stopped once with war. As an effect of that, 12,000 died in the Transnistrian camps. The policy on that and politics were, again, faking the reality. The government wanted to solve the problem of social order and criminality, not an ethnic approach. While investigations of historians prove that actually that was a policy of based on eugenics. They want to get rid of Roma, and again, there were different proposals on how to do that. There were even scientists that intensively work on Roma, publish on Roma, and they concluded somehow that solutions might be milder than killing them. Let's sterilize them. That was one of the Romanian anthropologists, ethnologists that wrote about Roma and their groups and division, and even about their language. So the second policy on Roma was somehow, again, having the same roots. From outside Romania, without the engagement of Roma at all in this process, except some politicians that were used in this regard, and the Romanian state reinterpreting in their way, the current from outside Romania. Unfortunately, the effect was the one that we know today. And only in the case of census, for instance, there is now an effect on our society. Roma from Romania are still afraid to say in front of census takers or anybody that will knock to the door that, yes, we are Roma. Because it happened in 1942 when they say that based on that, they were subject of being killed. An amazing fact from that period of time was that Roma soldiers that were fighting for Romania, they had their family deported at home. And some of them, not few, but many, wrote letters to Romanian leadership saying that, look, we are fighting for Romania, our family is vulnerable to be deported, please stop this, we are Romanians, we fight for the same country, and so on. In some cases worked, in some other cases didn't. So even Roma were fighting for Romania, that didn't matter. The policies were going further. And unfortunately, this episode, it's one of the darkest in our history. But important to understand how politics on Roma were developed as complete foreigners, as inferior, as people that we have to deal with, and put them in categories that are, of course, a social construct in nomads and sedentary. And why I keep mentioning that division? Because that will be important also for the next discussion on communism. But to this specific period of time, killing Roma, deporting them towards that was a policy of the Romanian state, not because of social order. That was, a way to avoid criticism, but because of Roma ethnicity. Because even people that had no criminal record, they were sedentary, they were integrated in work, they were educated to the level that education was available in Romania at that time, they were deported. So it didn't matter that. we arrived to the communism, and that's my favorite period of time due to my own studies and interest for my research. But I promise that I'm not going to keep you long on that. So communism was a phenomenon that took over the power in Romania in 1948. And it happened in a political context that I'm not going to describe because I'm sure that you have a lot of sources for that. But what happened with Roma was that in 1948, as a historian would say, they had a great chance to become a recognized nation among Romanians. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that. And the reason was, as historians again claimed, that Roma leadership was part of the previous regime and supportive to them. Second, Roma leadership was quite bourgeoisie. Third, why to bother? Let's consider Roma a social group. They are not an ethnic group. They are just a social group, and they were victims of the previous regimes. They were treated as inferior. They have social origin that are healthy, and they have to be part of the new human that communists project in theoretical approaches, but also in some practices of Soviet Union and even imported in Romania. So Roma had to become something else. They were socially vulnerable, and the politics. Remember that they were socially vulnerable. That's important also for later on. But now, let's see how communists treat that. So in 1948, they had a small decision that Roma needs to be helped to develop. And help meant that they had to invest in education, in healthcare, in housing, inclusion in general terms, with a purpose. And the purpose was assimilation. Well, now to assimilate a social group, that's something quite unique in the history, but that was the purpose. So the assimilation was not because they belonged to other ethnicity, but because they were belonging to a social group that was excluded from the resources. Funny, huh? As regime was, developing in Romania, they didn't have time, and Roma was not really a priority. In the first years of the communists, the main priority of the communist agenda was to confiscate Roma gold. That's because a lot of Roma that were living in a semi-nomadic style in Romania, especially those that belonging before to the landlords, to the rurals, they invested everything they had as goods in gold for a specific reason. It was easy to care and to hide. They knew that, and they want to confiscate all this gold. So that was the first policy. Search for Roma, look for Roma, confiscate their gold. And I study also in the archives of communist security, identifying a lot of signals that they receive that Roma might have gold, the other one might have gold, and so on. There were specialized police officers already infiltrated in Roma groups to collect information and to seek for the gold. Some of them were even Roma that served the Romanian communist states. That happened till 1977. That was the atmosphere. Roma were chased and searched for the gold. Other Roma that were not having gold, they were sedentary and they invested in houses and so on. They were included in labor factors. They were included in administration. Some of them became police officers. Some other became even mayor to localities representing the Communist Party. So they did some steps toward that. Then suddenly, for all Romanian people, because when communists took over the power, more than 60% of the population were illiterate. So communists imposed that education became mandatory for everybody. And a lot of Roma had the obligation to send their children to school. Women were first time employed in factories, qualified or non-qualified, didn't matter, they had to work. Otherwise, they would be arrested because it was a specific law on social parasites. And social parasites were the ones that were not included in work. So, Roma men and women had to work, meaning that their children couldn't stay at home alone. So they had to go to kindergarten and then education. In this way, created somehow a context where Roma could actually develop. But, well, if we take the good part of what communists did to our community, we could see from this point of view that socially were protected, they were included more in education and in what state was about to create. On the other hand, the pressure on chasing the one with gold was high. Roma identity was denied, as didn't exist. This is not an identity, not an ethnic identity. This is a social identity. And we have the role as civilized to civilize you that we are inferior. They took over something from Nazis even. The division among Roma, nomads, and sedentary, was imported from the Nazis, or pro-Nazi government of Romania, because policies were different from these two groups. Sedentary Roma were too plowed. And that's because, as I said, they had to work, they be in the factories, they become even part of administration. Their children were in school. While nomads couldn't be controlled, couldn't be put at work, couldn't be included in school because they were still traveling. So what they did, in 1977, they produced a study and proposed some measures. In the study that you'll see in the links attached to this video, it is the first basically Roma national strategy in Romania. They describe the situation, first of all. No, they talk about the dramatic situation of Roma not having proper housing, not having access to jobs because they're not qualified and then they need to get qualifications. They are not educated to get qualifications, so they need also education. They have bad sanitary and healthy situation and they need to be supported to access to health system. All the things that you could imagine were in this report also reflected a number of Roma. They were talking about close to 250,000 Roma, plus 7,000 they were considered to be semi-nomadics. And only, I think, 500, around 500 people, I'm just recalling from document, were about to be considered nomads. So all the policies on nomads were referring actually to these 500 people in Romanian context, and probably to the semi-nomadics. I have to explain you what semi-nomads means. Basically, nomadism, according to Kazanov, which is a specialist in nomadic studies, it's living in US, he wrote about Roma, said Roma are not nomads, because nomadism is a lifestyle, it's a perpetuous moving, while Roma were never purposely moving. They were in Romanian space, and they were using this type of mobility for economical reasons only. It was not a lifestyle. It was the way how they identify an opportunity to sell their products. So semi-nomads were living in their houses during the winter, and in the spring they will go around with their handicrafts and or products, selling them or work, and get back close to end of the autumn. That's what semi-nomads means. So the politics on that was quite straightforward. These people are social parasites, referring to nomads and semi-nomads. They are social parasites because they cannot be part of our labor forces. They're not proletariat. They are lumpen proletariat almost. Nobody mentioned that. It's just an interpretation of mine. So if they are lumpen proletariat, they have to have strict policies to stop them being lumpen and, being included in the proletariat. How to do that? Well, they started the forced centralization. So suddenly a law came out and they say, from now on, nobody could travel in Romania. You have to stay where you are and build their houses, communities, and so on. Remember that too, because the effect is that a lot of Roma communities are marginal, because Roma were established, especially these nomads, where they were doing their travelings, which is outside of villages or smaller city. Roma were now forced to settle. They couldn't travel. And there was a specific law. They were about to be arrested if somebody dared to keep doing their, sellings in a circular way. However, the official agenda of the Communist Party on assimilation of Roma with these measures in 1977 were not really the only. In the communist archives, in the security archives, there is another dimension of politics towards Roma. Communists were worried that Roma might organize ethnically, and that's because of the international context again. In 1971, Roma was gathering first time in UK, in London, building the symbols of Roma nation and propagate that towards Europe, especially in Yugoslavia, neighboring country of Romania, where a lot of Roma were attending, were part of the Congress. Romanian Roma couldn't get out because Romanian communist system was quite strict. And not to mention that once Ceausescu took over the power, the Romanian communism was not really only communism, was a nationalist communist, which changed the agenda. Romanian first. That's what mattered at that time. So, having this in mind, the international context and the way how the national communism want to protect and build and rebuild our history and connection to this land and so on and so on, organizing Roma was really something that was not wished by the system. And they made anything possible to block any contacts of Roma from Romania with other Roma from Yugoslavia, for instance. Rajko Duric had a huge presence in the documents or Mr. Balic, in the documents of Communist Archive, corresponding with Roma from Romania, such as Ion Cioabă, which was a traditional leader of Roma, and Nicolae Gheorghe, which was a young Roma intellectual. This document shows that everything that was connected to Romani language, to Roma history, to Roma culture, to Roma organizing in a way or another was to be stopped. They had, during the communism, a census of Roma intellectuals. They asked all the districts to come up and indicate who are the Roma intellectuals. And they had a list with these people, watching them not to perturb the order. Others, at the time, they were translating all the international documents that talked about Roma nation, or Roma movement, or Roma symbols. They even captured a Bible translated in Romani language, and that created a huge tension. They were looking to see who brought it in Romania and who was the receiver. They found it on the street, and that's why they didn't know how to treat that. Then suddenly, because of the efforts of Nicolae Gheorghe working with Cioabă, the system started saying, okay, let's see what's with this Roma, especially because they could get compensations for what happened to Roma during the Second World War. And Nicolae Gheorghe find this niche of communication with the authorities, saying that, look, if we make a case on Roma that were deported by the pro-Nazi government of Romania, we could ask compensation from the German state, and also we could, connect with others from the world. And it was, kind of temporary openness to Roma. So in 1980, it was published in the Romani language, in the Romanian communism, translated by Nicolae Gheorghe and Luminița Cioabă and Ion Cioabă, a book that was the biography of Nicolae Ceausescu. That's available to Roma Education Fund if you want to see the original document. Also, allowed them to have a first Roma festival organized in Romania. And that's a funny reflection. In the archives of the communists, I found two reports from the two infiltrated security. One negative. Such events will put in danger our nation. Some might be dangerous because they might film and send these images, footages to outside of Romania, and so on. And the other one said, oh, such an excellent manifestation. They have such a great culture and their music is so great and was excellent to attend there and so on. So, even in the system were always, not clear interpretation about who are Roma, what's the danger, what we should do with them, and so on. During the communist regime, we had two main, let's say, politics. One was the official one, which you may call it policy, which was the assimilation of Roma the Gold, and another one was to make sure that Roma has no chance to organize in any sense politically or culturally or around their ethnicity. However, in 83s and 80s, they relaxed a bit because of the potential opportunities to claim benefits because of the situation of Roma during the World War, which was a path that Nicolae Gheorghe together with Ion Cioba opened. They allow to organize some small things. For instance, they were allowed to publish a book in Romanes, translated by Nicolae Gheorghe, Ion Cioba, and Lumința Cioba, a short, quite huge, biography of Nicolae Ceaușescu. So, they published in Romani a book to the official printing house, which was an amazing step. It was the first book basically published in Romani language in Romanian space. Great! Second one were some small festivals. One of them in Târgu Jiu, in Meteor district, with quite interesting reports in the archives, and so on. Even to some extent, Roma leader, traditional leader Ion Cioba, was allowed to participate to the International Roma Congress. But that's a nice story that I will share with you. As Cioba requested a passport to travel to Germany for the Congress, that was the context. You couldn't hold the passport at home. You had it to the police office. So you had to ask for it. And he asked, I need to travel in Germany for the Congress between that and that period. The strategy that is visible in the archives was that we're not going to say no. We're just not answering, and we'll answer to him after the Congress ends. It's a bureaucracy issue. So this is what they did. The police replied to Cioba, said, "Oh, Mr. Cioba, you can come now and pick up your passport." And Cioba's reply was extraordinary. "Don't bother. I was already and got back." How was possible? Because a lot of Roma had networks to get out of the country, and they knew how to do that. In Timișoara especially was a huge place where people were corrupting security and police officer with gold to get a passport and to get out of the country. And they learned that, also as reflected in the security archives, from media. German media, ZDF, was publishing a report about a lot of Roma on the German streets. So they were wondering, how these people got here. So that was the path. Corruption of the system. There were many funny things during the communist time because everything was highly bureaucratic and ideological. They couldn't report something that was not really okay to higher authorities, and they avoid to do that. But one of the main things that changed this situation was the letter that Nicolae Gheorghe did using a nickname to international media. It was called The Witness of a Gypsy, talking about the dramatic situation of Roma in Romania, the racism, the segregation, abuses, violences, police torture, and so on. And that changed the situation. It changed because then security intensified their work and were looking to potential nationalists, gypsy nationalists as they call it in the official documents. Nicolae Gheorghe was one of them, but not the only. However, they used all the mechanisms they had to stop any further organizing of Roma, to stop the relationship between Cioba and Nicolae Gheorghe, to betray one another. However, they intensified their work to identify Roma that were potential organizers of nationalist Țigan. They were so afraid about it. And there were some targets. First of them, and the most visible, was Nicolae Gheorghe, probably Ion Cioba and others too, that were also watched to stop them organizing. They didn't succeed too much because still Nicolae Gheorghe had his contact with researchers and was a good cooperation with some embassies that were providing books to him and letters to other Roma from different countries. He had good contacts with American anthropologists, French sociologists, political scientists from Germany, and so on that were coming here to study. and connecting with Nicolae as also being a highly educated person, capable to interact and to debate and help other researchers. Working for the Institute of Sociology, so also he was capable to use his position to interact with researchers in a way that actually he would get information from outside and also providing it further. So to cut it here, the communists had again two main policies: assimilating a social group, Țigan, and not allowing Roma as an ethnic group to organize. One was official and the other one unofficial. To the first one was a report in 83, 5 years after the release, saying that, well, not much happened. We still have nomads and we still have an issue of integrating Roma, assimilating Roma, and we still have an issue on education access, in health, in housing, in labor, in police and the social order, and so on and so on. Why they concluded that? Because the measures that they took actually were never implemented, except some of the things that were related to that, like sedentarization of nomads. Again, the main target group was the nomads Roma, while they were considered the sedentary, already part of proletariat. So that was the politics of and the policy of assimilation. That was the third one that I was talking today. First one was emancipation, second one was extermination, and third one is assimilation. Let's move to the next one. The communists started in 1948 in relation to Roma and being actually developing in Romania with a document that was referring to Roma as a social group that needs to be assimilated and not to be considered an ethnic group, a national minority. Then in 1977 was released a first study and policies and measures attached to it to assimilate Roma, focusing and dividing Roma, first of all, in two groups, sedentary Roma and nomad Roma, focusing to assimilate and to deal with the situation of the nomads as being parasites, while sedentary Roma had to be supported to develop themselves and to have better access to education, labor, housing, health, and social order. In 1983, we had a document that was a report on the action plan from 1977, saying that not much happened, and that's because of the difficulties to assimilate Țigan, but the measure should continue in the following years. And this is actually officially the documents that were produced by the communists related to Roma specifically. There are other hidden documents that refer to social parasites. You have no job, you go to jail. Probably that was also built on the anti-Roma policy. Second one was gold confiscation. That was specifically for Roma with gold because nomads were holding quite an important amount of gold as the only way to transport valuable things in a small pack. Sedentarization, so confiscation of gold. Confiscating gold was an implicit policy. Then sedentarization was also an implicit without mentioning Roma, but was clearly referring to the nomads. And then also forced integration in labor forces was also a policy towards especially nomad Roma. Besides official policies, there were other policies. We could interpret that they were referring to Roma without actually being mentioned that are referring to Roma. In any sense, for many Roma that I've been talking during my studies, they will identify communism as one of the best period of growing, of developing. That's because the social context and conditions. Roma came from that period of slavery and then deportation and considered as inferior of society, and suddenly in the communists they were considered as equal. In theory, of course, they were treated as equal. They were given some social and economical support, like housing, like jobs. First time, some women had official job, and that include also salary and vacation and all the privileges that come with jobs. Kids were supposed to go to kindergartens because nobody could take care of them while parents were both working. So in this way, created an environment that Roma established their seeds to develop. On the other hand, it's also that I mentioned that communists try to see Roma as a social group with potential to organize ethnically. So they did whatever they could to stop this. They had to be the new Romanians. After the revolution against communism, for Roma was a very good context to start organizing. Associations were built, Roma politicians show up, Roma educated intellectuals that were building the communists took over and claimed that they are Roma and they have to organize around this ethnicity, which was an excellent development. However, the official policies on Roma were called integration. Let's integrate Roma. Integration meant, as I showed before, a transition from the previous regime. If communists took over the division of Roma nomad century, the, let's say, New Democrats, post-communists, they took over the issues that communists reflect on and they had to develop. This was labor, health, education, housing, social order. Integration of Roma was basically another word for assimilation. What means integration? For the Romanian state in 90s, this is exactly what meant. Roma had to be socially equal with others and, be part of the society, integrated, without being Roma. Because no other measures were linked to that, like, Roma culture, Romanian language, Roma identity, Roma theater, Roma museum, monuments, public memorialization, nothing. Everything was about social measures. And these policies were, of course, done without a real Roma engagement. Integration of Roma was called the first strategy that was published in 2001 in Romania. And unfortunately, that was a political declaration. Or maybe fortunately. And that's because integration, how they saw that time, was not really that integration that you might think over. No budget, no action plan. It was only a political declaration. That was the first Roma strategy. They built after that a strategic action plan together with Roma Civic Movement. But still, they had an action plan, no budget to it. So of course, nothing implemented. However, in this period of time, Roma movement flourished, and Nicolae Gheorghe, with his experience from the communist time, he managed to put in place one of the strongest civic movements of Roma in Europe, pressuring the government to do their job, organizing the communities around their own ethnicity, organizing festivals, concerts, communications, and also open up for building a political wing of Roma movement. Political wing that proved actually to be another wheel in the system of the government. But however, there is a political representation of Roma in Romania since 90s. And this representation, it is not only at the local level, but also in the Romanian parliament on reserved seat, affirmative action. Romania became suddenly one of the most democratic countries in Europe in relation to this subject, because in the Romanian parliament, each national minority has a representation by affirmative action. Roma are also in parliament, as in 90s, being recognized unofficially as a national minority. In fact, in Romania, even today, we don't have a law for national minority. It is just a way to interpret who is and who's not a national minority. We have 18 national minorities plus Hungarians that are represented in parliament, and all the rest are not considered to be a national minority. Roma, luckily, because of the work of Nicolae Gheorghe, that was part of the first form of governments after 90s, pushed that Roma are represented too. And today, we are luckily represented in parliament with basically small results, but we are there because of this capacity of Nicolae Gheorghe and some other Roma that were in communism active in organizing themselves, like Ion Cioabă, like Vasile Burtea, and others, had the capacity to identify where they have to produce the change. That was in recognition. So Roma were already included in 90s. Then what followed was, social measures like let's do more social work in Roma communities, let's organize vocational training, this type of services. And then suddenly in 90s started intervening conflicts in Romania. First, a major one was between Romanian and Hungarians, but then follow a lot that engaged Roma with Romanian or Roma with Hungarians. There were such 40 intervening conflicts. And civil society, Roma civil society, has to deal with this. They had to intervene and make sure that they mediate and balance and protect the Roma community against violences. That was the first job after the 90s, where racism really exploded in Romania after a period of silence. Communism treated racism in a very drastic manner. If you were publicly a racist, then you could go to jail. Even some measures were racist, but they were talking about individuals that could use racism. So now it was a kind of release. Everybody could talk about everybody. That was democracy interpreted. Everybody could say about Roma anything, including priests that were giving the signal of the community, let's attack the gypsies. It happened in Bolentin and other communities. So it was a very difficult situation for Roma when suddenly, after a period of developing, growing, assimilating some of them, but not all of them, they become target of violences because of the racism. We had to move as a movement towards this dimension, while politics were just simply dealing votes and being annexed to the mainstream political parties. This is also the situation that we have today. Roma politics doesn't exist. Basically, they are just an attachment to mainstream political parties. However, integration meant another form. It was another word. Let's say more distant from what assimilation meant. The measures were similar to the one proposed in 1977. The solutions sometimes were similar. So basically, what was changed was the simple word of assimilation with now having integration. And that evolved once Romania got into EU in something else. It is called the policy, the name of the policy is called inclusion. So it's not assimilation, it's not integration, it's inclusion. Okay, if we look on the theory of inclusion, that looks closer somehow to what an open society should be, where everybody's included and they are part of that society. However, when we look to the solutions proposed, even by the European Commission and the Romanian state, they are tackling mostly the social dimension of the Roma issue, poverty, exclusion, education, housing, which has to be, and less on the Roma identity. It was a struggle for Roma to push the government to accept that we have to also take into consideration this dimension. We are still not having a museum in Romania. We are still not having a theater. We are still not having a public representation of the Roma, not memorialization. We don't have a TV show. We don't have basically nothing that relates to Roma identity. So now, if you look back to the meaning of these words, I think inclusion is not much different from integration, and integration is not much different from assimilation. It's just another way to describe, with potentially slight difference between measures, but still problems are the same that we are tackling. If we look to the history of Romanian Roma from this point of view, we will see that there were different stages. First stage was emancipation. Second one was extermination. Third one was assimilation. Fourth one is integration. And last one, the current one, it's inclusion. Now, the difference of this, sure, it's enormous. If you look what assimilation means and how is this now fixed in our interpretation, it is a huge difference from what inclusion means. But if you look deeper on the measures that are attached to this, what assimilation meant for the Romanian communists and what inclusion means for the current Romania, the difference is not that big. Basically, are the same issues, same measures with a different language. And another big problem of this policy is that Roma engagement in this, it's almost inexistent. Okay, today there are some consultations on policies on Roma, also with some Roma, but these Roma are mostly politicians that are also attached to the power, so they should praise the mainstream party. Therefore, whenever we see now a strategy that it is consulted with Roma, in fact, I think they are consulted with political representation of the Roma that are not actually politicians, but are next to the mainstream political party. Therefore, consultation with Roma doesn't exist even today. That's another part that is completely missing from this policy, and probably some of them are not successful also because of that. Roma are not asked, why don't you really want to, send your children to school? And they will say probably because of that or the other reason. Some are in the community, some other in the system, some other to the teacher, some other to the environment. There might be different reasons for that and different way to solve the problem. Also research. Well, now they mention some research, but I think it's just simple bibliography. They want to show up that they've been reading some researches and books and so on. In fact, when you look in the documents and measure proposed, you cannot find the link between bibliography and those measures. Third thing that is also important and crucial is that there is no pressure on the government actually to implement those measures. Romanian government today, I've been asking them in a public conference in the Romanian parliament, what is the budget necessarily for Roma strategy? And the answer was, no answer. Because they don't know. Because nobody think to how much money we need to implement our own strategy. And that's because it is still a way to import, values and measures from outside and making them in Romania a specific form and paint well the fence and then show, look, we have the strategy, but, it is a problem with Roma that they don't want to integrate. So the tactics of blaming the Roma for the insuccess of the government policy without actually Roma being engaged to design, to implement, to evaluate, to monitor those policies, of course, it is a blame for Roma. They are guilty for that. And that's the tactic of the government since emancipation of the Roma. That's what happened when Roma were free as slaves, and suddenly they got back to the owners, serving them in another form. Oh, they want to be like that. They want to be, they see how gypsies are. They will go back to their owners, to the master. Probably measures were missing. Well, for sure, if you look back in the history, this is what happened. And there is no other solution for the ex-slaves unless they will go back to their masters to say, I will work for you free of charge, just give me food. Same happened in the between the war period, when there is a growth of Roma movement, political engagement, and newspapers. But they were young in this; they didn't understand all the politics, and they were easy to be attracted by anti-Semitism, by fascists, by Romanian Nazis, and they become part of it, praising them. The Nazi salute was in the first page of the Romanian newspaper, of the Roma newspaper, in that period of time. So the policies that they invented was, let's get rid of these people. Solutions, I share with you what were already, but of course, Roma were not consulted at all. What we could do best for you. Were just leaders asked. They were even helping Nazis to measure Roma scalp and nose and so on and so on. Third, assimilation. That was a decision. Roma are not anymore an ethnic group. They've never been an ethnic group. They are just a social group, and some of them were exploited by the bourgeoisies and the target of Nazis, so you need to protect them and make them grow. But assimilating a social group, that's still a funny, rhetorics. This is exactly how the document is called. Let's assimilate Tsigan, and then when they define Tsigan, it's a social group. That's also funny from some researchers of our time that consider Roma being mostly a social a group with social issues and not an ethnic group. We have to decide once, what is Roma, and for that probably Roma are the best to be asked. or engage in a discussion about this. And when I say Roma, I'm not referring to a simple politician's token person that will be used to validate or invalidate a path. Unfortunately, that's the situation today with the policies we have in place related to inclusion of Roma. There are Roma token, part of political parties, some of them associated with the power in the government, so they will listen and applaud whatever government will say. Roma history, unfortunately, in Romania, it is always without Roma. It is not with Roma, it is about Roma. So probably in the next phase, we have to get back to the emancipation of Roma as the main policy that is not finalized. That should be where we start Roma politics. Thank you.